So we are on day 44 of this terrible time, 44 days of grief and sadness, 44 days of missing, the 1,200 killed and the 240 taken hostage, 44 days of worrying about our soldiers. For those of you who are new to Literary Modiin, I'm Julie Zuckerman. And normally, Literary Modiin is a monthly author series on Zoom and occasionally in person that connects readers and writers of Jewish fiction, memoir, and poetry. We've been holding events for 4.5 years, and many of the authors who have appeared here are with us this evening. And I see Literary Modiin as a forum to build bridges through literature between those of us here in Israel and those outside of Israel. This is our second Israel Solidarity event since October 7th, and we'll hear several short readings. And after that, I'll offer a prayer or two and say a few words about how to help and some additional resources, and then we'll open it up to those of you in the audience who'd like to ask a question or make a brief comment. But before we get started with all of our readers tonight, I just want to hold a brief moment of silence. Okay, I'm now going to introduce our first reader. Vivian Cohen is a Modi'in-based writer completing her MA in creative writing at Bar-Ilan University, and she will soon join the staff of the Ilano Review as the creative nonfiction editor. So let me spotlight her. And Vivian, take it away. I didn't have time to put the pictures in. Sorry.
So thank you. Just a little bit of context. This is my online diary. It began as a project to share with my friends and family in Spanish on WhatsApp. And very soon it became apparent that I needed to have some sort of repository. So what I'm sharing now, as Julie said, it's day 44, but this is the entry back from November 1st, which was day 26. And it's entitled Lifesavers. There were hundreds and hundreds of people at Lavi's funeral today. In case of a rocket siren, said the master of ceremonies, please follow the instructions from the home front command and spread out as far as possible without running. Then lie down and cover your head. We will announce when it's safe to come back. There was no siren, only torrential rain. After the psalms and after the mourner's Kaddish and after the eulogies of the commanders and friends and siblings and parents, and after the rain had finally stopped, dozens of colorful wreaths and mementos and pins and scouts' t-shirts were laid on top of the grave. I couldn't stop thinking of a poem by Yehuda Amichai I saw yesterday for the first time, in which he compares the wreaths laid on a freshly dug grave to lifesavers on the water. The soldiers in the grave say, you, up there, placing a wreath upon us, like a lifesaver of flowers. See how our faces all look alike, between stretched out arms, but remember the differences that were between us and the joy in the water. There were wreaths from the IDF and from the family, from the municipality and from the Scouts tribe. Then something caught my eye, a wreath that said, from Ram, the name of Lavi's Scouts troop, and in the center, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, a photo I recognized. 4 inseparable friends who call themselves the Ram Bros, a photo from a time before the buzz cuts, the uniforms, the tragedies. Did you bring this today? I asked B, my son, as we made our way back to the car. Yes. What can we do for Lavi now, except to remember his individuality, his uniqueness? It turns out he actually told us. A couple of weeks ago, Lavi called his sister while she was still in a trek in Nepal to tell her that he had left the letter in a special folder in his computer, just in case. At the end of the funeral, she read a few excerpts. I wrote my own eulogy, it began, because what purpose does a life serve if one does not have the opportunity to eulogize others? And it ended with these words. I ask you not to sink into mourning, really thing, and it can be exhausting. But doing, the actual doing, can grow out of this. It's not exhausting, it's constructive. There's nothing harder for me than doing nothing, and therefore I ask from everyone surrounding me, do always. So thank you, Lavi, for everything you've done, especially today, for throwing us a lifeline.
Thank you. I'm gonna give people the link to your diary afterwards. So yeah. Okay. Now I'd like to introduce Yonatan Berg and Joanna Chen. Yonatan Berg is a leading Hebrew poet who has won the Yehuda Amichai Prize and a number of other national awards. And Joanna Chen is a writer and literary translator whose work was a finalist in the Jewish Book Awards, and she won the 2023 Paper Brigade Award for Israeli Fiction. So let me spotlight both of them. Spotlight, and I have to ask you to unmute. And do you want me to share the screen now with just the English translation, or?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So I want to thank you for the invitation. I want to thank everyone that are listening. I just want to say a quick word before I read the first poem. It's hard times for all of us, I'm sure. I have family members now in Gaza, and all of us are grieving and feeling their hurt. But I do want to say that as a Hebrew writer, and now I'm in a discussion with Joanna and with all of you that are English speakers and English writers, that I think also these days bring up front things that we left behind or didn't give enough attention. And one of them, I think, is the strong, and I think needs to be stronger connection between us Hebrew writers and Jewish writers that write in English or other languages. I think these times show that we need to have support for each other. We need to have solidarity with each other. We need to have a dialogue one with another, because there's things that we go through together. There's a mutual story of all of us. And I think this dialogue will help Hebrew writers increase the limits of their writing and the perspective they have, and vice versa to the other side. So I think these events and other events and places that we can share thoughts as writers that share the Jewish flavors in different languages is very important. And I hope these days will let us understand that we need to talk more one with another. So I will start with all of the poems are from a new book that was supposed to come out last week, and is not coming out, of course, because of the events, and we postponed it, and I don't know when it's go out. It was even printed, and it's waiting in the publishing house stores for better times. So the first one is called ריצת ערב. במנזר בעמק המצלבה, נזירה בודדה מדליקה נר לבדידותו של בן האלוהים. בתוך הגעגוע אינך לבד. אני רץ מהר יותר בחושבי על מי שאיננו. אנחנו מכונה, הזיעה שלנו היא עדים על פני גוף חימום מותש. כמה פעמים עוד ארתח, אלוהים. כמה פעמים מילים בקול נמוך וכינור, כמה פעמים האמן שבא במפתיע ומפיל אותי על ברכיי. אני רץ מהר כדי שגופי יגיד לא עוד, כמו הנפש מוקדם יותר מול ספר היסטוריה. אני רוצה עוד פעם אחת גוף קל, את השנים ההן על הדשא בתוך השמש. אני רץ למען הילד שהייתי, ואיני יכול עוד למצוא בעצמות הכבדות והקשות. אני מדליק נר לעצמי, ורץ איתו בחשיכה.
Oh, there you go. Okay, go ahead.
Evening run. Down in the valley of the cross, a nun lights a candle for the lonely child of God. Within yearning, you are not alone. It is only waiting for the dead that distances them from you. I run quicker when thinking of those who are no more. I'm a machine. My sweat is vapor rising above an exhausted heating element. How many times will I boil, God? How many times will words be spoken low? How many times a violin? How many times will our men appear out of the blue, facing the bright, bringing me to my knees? I run fast, so my body will say no more, a soul facing a history book. I want a body of lightness. I want those years on the grass in the sun. I run for the boy I once was, the one I no longer find in these heavy, stiff bones. I light a candle for myself and run with it through the darkness.
Thanks, John. And I want to thank you for all the ongoing quest together with poetry and language. Thank you. The next one, שני ימי ראש השנה. את הצעקה אנחנו לוקחים מהאייל, ואת הכניעה מצבע הטליתות. ניגונים הם פנסים קטנים במנהרה חשוכה. אתם רצים ומשתוללים כפי שהייתי רוצה להתפלל. אל תלמדו מהמילים פה. האל אינו מעביר ומונה, הוא הגעגוע והבריזה. התשובה והתפילה והצדקה שלי השנה הן לקחת אתכם למחרת למעיין, כדי שתוכלו להגיד בעוד שנים, אז בראש השנה, במים הקרים, התחבקנו.
Days of prayer. We take roar from a ram. We take submission from a talit. Melodies are flashlights in a tunnel. You run and rage the way I want to pray. Do not learn from these words. God is neither conduit nor counter. God is yearning and breeze. Atonement and prayer and charity this year is to take you to a spring in the Judean hills, so you will be able to say in years to come, back then, in cold water, we embraced. Under a fig tree, I realize I have leaned on poetry for too long. It is the word that contains us, an old prayer of mine, suddenly embodied.
Thanks, Joanna. The last one will be לילדיי. הייתי רוצה להיות לכם קהלת, לקשור בסרט את מראות העולם, מתנה, אבל דעתי מבולבלת מדתות ומעשים, מפוזרת כמו הצעצועים שלכם בסוף יום. הייתי רוצה להיות לכם עלווה סבוכה, אבל הניפוצים יבשים על גבעה. אני מניח אתכם בעדינות על המזרון, ובכל ערב מוחק פקודה אחת שקיבלתי. הסתער, אש, זיג לשמאל, זיג לימין, אתם מרוקנים אותי משרירים. אני אומר רך, 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 במקום קדוש, קדוש, קדוש. בתפילת העמידה מחוץ לחדר שלכם. אני מאזין לסדרת נשימות כמו להנה ימים באים, איש תחת גפנו, ושאר הבלונים הצבעוניים.
To my children, I want to be your Ecclesiastes, to gift you mirrors of the world tied up with ribbon. but my knowledge is confused by religion and deeds, scattered like toys at the end of the day. I want to be your foliage, dense and cool against the heat, but I am dry thorns on a hilltop. Each evening, I lay you down, gentle, in your beds, crossing it off my list of duties. Charge, fire, zig to the left, zag to the right. You empty me of brawn. I say, soft, 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 instead of holy, holy, holy. I stand outside your room, praying Amidah. I listen to the rhythm of your breath, as if listening to, behold, the days cometh, as if listening to every man under his fig tree, listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
You both. Thank you both. Okay. And please put in the chat the name of your new book, Yonatan. Okay. I want to introduce our next writer. Joan Leegant is a 5-time visiting writer at Bar-Ilan's creative writing program, and her next story collection won the New American Fiction Prize and will be out in May 2024. And she'll be back with us then talking about her new collection when it comes out. So Joan, please take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me well enough? The mic is okay? Okay. So I'm going to read from an essay that I prepared for this, and it helped me sort through my own feelings too. So thank you for that. Why March? It was 34 degrees, cold even for Boston. The vast parking lot at Gillette Stadium at 8 in the morning, an uninviting gray sea. Waving clipboards besides a small fleet of pristine white charter buses, young volunteers cheerfully shouted instructions to the 100+ adults, average age 60, and that's being generous, telling us how to sign in and which motor coach to go to, and to be sure to identify a buddy so that no one would inadvertently be left behind at one of the innumerable rest stops along the 10-hour way. They were in their 20s, revved up and herding us like camp counselors, which in fact the one in charge of our bus had been. How did I know? She beamed at me. And we, their charges, easy to gently rib if anyone wanted to, a plethora of white hair, a mystical confusion over getting on a group WhatsApp, and had the weather been warmer, probably Birkenstocks. But no one was interested in offering up even mild barbs. It was going to be a long 2 days. The camp counselors were actually employees of CJP, Boston's Jewish Federation, that's trying to make it easy for anyone who wanted to go to Washington to join the march in support of Israel. And cities around the world, London, Berlin, Paris, Stockholm, had attracted crowds of anti-Israel protesters of sometimes 100,000. In our own backyard, demonstrators had gathered in Copley Square 5 days before to accuse Kamala Harris during her Boston visit of committing crimes against humanity for being Joe Biden's vice president. College students across this university-heavy town had been staging sit-ins and die-ins, charging Israel with genocide, and at one school sending around emails saying there should be no space, consideration, or support for Zionism on their campus. The bus ride down to D.C. was understood to be deadly serious. The only people poking fun at us were ourselves. A man from my minion elbowed me as we ascended the steps of the bus and said, should we have brought along guitars? The fact is, I hate rallies, demonstrations, marches, all that fist waving and cheering on cue, the whiff of performative activism, people doing whatever they're doing to make themselves feel, or worse, look good. The last time I went to a rally was in May of 1970 to protest the Vietnam War. I can't exactly say why I went. A handful of Polaroids from that day show me and my college roommate sitting on the grass looking pensive. In other photos, 10-foot-tall people in face paint and costumes lurch by on stilts. But Vietnam permeated everything in our young university-centric lives. Twice, spring finals had been canceled because faculty sided with the student protests. college deferments from the draft were being abolished. Kids at Kent State had been killed while demonstrating, and we were all enraged. We hated Nixon and McNamara, his Secretary of Defense. And although my brother had enlisted and was stationed at West Point teaching computer programming to cadets, and my brother-in-law was practicing dentistry at Otis Air Force Base on Cape Cod, I saw the military as an extension of all that was morally suspect and ugly. 8 years later, I was at the old movie theater in Jerusalem's Kiryat HaYovel to see Coming Home, which had managed to get past the censors who had their office down the hall from where I worked as a legal researcher for the fledgling precursor to the Israeli Ministry of Environmental Protection. The movie, starring Jane Fonda and Jon Voight, is a searing critique of the Vietnam War. By the time of its release in 1978, a good part of America had come to agree. After the film was over, I went outside. Maybe it was a matinee because I remember it was sunny and bright. And there, milling around on the sidewalks, were Israeli soldiers, lots of soldiers. It was just everyday life. And right then, I learned an important lesson that I needed to learn at 28, that my anti-military stance, while not exactly fraudulent or performative, was fungible, mutable, fluid as water, and that the need for a standing army is entirely different when the enemy is at your border instead of 8,000 miles away. On the Friday before the march in support of Israel, the last day to sign up for the Federation buses, I jumped out of a hot bath after 2 minutes, wrapped myself in a towel, and told my husband we had to go. I had read about another 100,000 person rally against Israel in yet another European city, and it had catapulted me out of the tub. Did I go to feel solidarity? Ambivalently. There were legislators speaking who never in my life would I campaign for. Did I go for performative reasons to collect my halo? I hope not. Did I go because I needed validation that anti-Semitism is bad? No, because there's no argument there. I went because what if only 20,000 showed up, 40,000? With those pressuring Biden to capitulate, say, see, there's not so many of them. From all of them, all across America, they can't even get as many as showed up in one measly European capital. And because, what else could I do? I couldn't pick avocados from rotting fields in the Gaza envelope, or sort donated clothes for evacuees in Eilat, or make the International Red Cross visit the hostages buried in the tunnels. All I could do was wake up early on a cold morning and get on a bus. Thank you.
So much, Joan. Thank you so much. Okay. Our next reader is Haim Watzman. Haim is an author, playwright, translator living in Jerusalem. He actually was at our first Solidarity event, and he read a short story then, and now he's going to read a second short story that's kind of a sequel, and I'm going to put it in the chat for those of you who would like the direct link, although I'll send it out again afterwards. So let me spotlight you, and I will put the thing in the chat.
Thanks, Julie. So this is the second story in a projected series. The third story is already ready, but I'm not quite sure where it's going to appear, on what platform. People who want to keep up with me can subscribe to my Substack newsletter. But the plan is to write a story every couple of weeks in which each one is one of the secondary characters. Each story turns into the main character in the next one, all about the current situation and the war. And I want to dedicate this reading to my mother in Denver, Joan Watzman, who is, as we speak, celebrating her 95th birthday with the family. And I was supposed to be there, but Soka Goal, I'm here with you instead of with her. Shelter. Ruth Musafi turns on the light, but the room remains murky. She maneuvers the wheelie bag that holds her swimming things through the doorway, then shuts and locks the door behind her. Her feet ache and she's exhausted. Not from swimming, she'd barely done that, but from walking home all the way from the IMCA. because she'd been afraid to take the bus. When she turns to open the shades that cover the large living room window, she sees Ezra sitting on the couch. He has a pencil in his right hand and the Yisrael Hayom Sudoku open on the coffee table. She holds in the hiss that wants to come out and surveys him slowly from bald pate to rumpled slacks. She freezes. I let myself in. The cumulative agony of years of pain wells up from deep within her body. Hadn't they reached a way of managing this since their separation? Why this violation? I knocked and there was no answer. You rejected my call. You should leave. He examines the Sudoku, ponders, and inverts his pencil to erase a number. Don't you think we should be together at a time like this, with children and grandchildren at war? He asks, staring down at the puzzle page. No. Remember what I whispered to you in bed on the night you cast me out? He looks up at her. I remember your devotion when you were young, how as a bride you loved me, how you followed me through the desert, through a land not sown. I still do. And how did you repay that? Ruth trembles. You raised your hand against me. You tried to turn my children into my enemies. The first split second sounds faint and distant, like the horn of a car way out on Ben Zakkai Street. But the wail grows louder as it rises up the scale and seems to be sounding from all directions. Ezra grabs her hand. She shakes it off. No time for that, he commands as he opens the door. His fingernails dig into her forearm as he pulls her out and down the stairs from the second floor and through the dazzling light of the yard and down into the gloom of the shelter on the other side. He releases her arm only when a figure envelops him in a bear hug. Ezra, the bear rumbles. Blessed is he who revives the dead. It's Yishao, Eti Badichi's son, the one who turned into a Haredi rabbi, dark suit and Hamburg in the works. While he was in high school, he'd worked for Ezra at the shawarma stand. An explosion, muted by the shelter's thick walls, then another. Interception, Ezra says. Where's your mother? Ruth asks. The siren is still sounding. You know Ima, fearless. She refuses to come, just goes on ironing. I'll go get her. Ezra grabs her arm again. She tries to shake it off. Also, I need to hang up my swimsuit and towel or they'll get smelly. Sit down, Ezra directs, propelling her through the dusk toward a plastic chair. And to Yishao. We were just updating each other about the grandkids in the army. You know how it is. Some call her, some call me. The siren fades out. The murmur of the other neighbors in the shelter becomes audible. They're talking about her, she knows. How many? Yishao asks. 4 of the boys, 2 of the girls, Ezra replies. And Amram, that pipsqueak? Not such a pipsqueak. He'll be 40 in November. Anyway, he packed his kit bag and wanted to go, but Miriam blocked the door and said no. 40? No way. Ezra is so absorbed in the conversation that it gives Ruth an opening. She slips off the chair and, moving silently through the perimeter of darkness along the shelter's walls, reaches the heavy metal door, which remains half open, and sneaks out. She heads for the next entrance over, not even waiting for her eyes to adjust to the sun, up 3 flights. The door to the Bedichis is half open. She knocks and calls out, It's Ruth. Come on in. Eti's raspy voice is barely audible over the radio, which is on very loud. Non-stop coverage of the war. She's at her ironing board in the kitchen, a cigarette sticking out of the side of her mouth. A breeze and a ray of sunlight shine through the window over the sink. A young woman sits at the kitchen table, her back to Ruth, her hands clasping a glass of tea and her eyes directed at the window. She seems not to notice Ruth at all. Ruth thinks that Eddie is telling her that the girl's name is Na'ama, but the 2 broadcast voices are analyzing the bombing raids in Gaza. Eddie points with her cigarette. Ashes fall off, some on the shirt she's pressing. She's a friend of my Hadass's. Her boyfriend lives in Kfar Aza, Etty says, raising her voice. Or lived, missing, no sign, apartment burned. Naama, if that is her name, seems not to hear and continues to gaze at the sunray. Can you imagine? Etty goes back to her chore, but looks Ruth up and down. What is it? Ezra, I came home from the pool and he was sitting in the living room. I told you to change the lock. He grabbed me and dragged me to the bomb shelter. Etty looks away. I'm so fixated on the news that I haven't offered you anything. She puts her iron down and reaches over to switch on the electric kettle. Yizhar says you refuse to come down. I have too much to do. Etty puts tea bags and mint leaves in 3 glass mugs, stirs in sugar and pours. She glances at Naamah. Too much to do. What are you going to do about Ezra? I don't know. He scares me. Even at home, I'm in danger. Ruth watches Etty take the still full tea glass from Naamah's hands and replace it with a fresh one. Naamah accepts it passively, not even looking. The glint of the sun off the glass startles Ruth. The door opens and Yizhar walks in. Ruth sees Ezra in the shadows behind, waiting. Etty sees him too. Ema, as Ruth looks desperately for a place to hide, the siren sounds again, both from the outside and from the radio. Yizhar steps forward and reaches out to his mother. Ezra slides into the light and extends his hand. Etty slaps Ezra, and the sound of it reverberates over the siren. He recoils. Yizhar pleads. Ema, we should go to the shelter. Go, you and your friend. Ema, I'm just trying to protect you. The world's a dangerous place, Yizhari. Nothing you can do about that. Ema. She pushes the 2 men out the door. Ruth and me, we're safe here. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you very much. Okay. I'd like to introduce Aviya Kushner. She is the author of Wolf, Lamb, Bomb, and the Grammar of God. And let me just scroll over so I can find her. There you are. And you want me to share your screen?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
My screen, I mean.
Your screen, go ahead.
Okay.
It's an honor to be here with all of these wonderful writers, and I was especially moved by what Yonatan said about connections between Jewish writers of various languages. So I'm going to start with a poem from Wolf Lambaum, which is a book-length conversation with Yeshayahu, and then I'm going to read some new poems. Why don't you write in Hebrew? Because I'm afraid of you, Isaiah. Afraid I'll hear the 6 wings, 2 to cover the face, and 2 to cover the legs, and 2 to fly. And I ask, how can I praise wings that cover feet and face? And how can I curse when you have already cursed with your carcasses of sleazy financiers, with your ugly and public deaths for those who squeeze the poor, the widowed, the temporarily weak? You ask me to compete head on with you, and I can't because I cannot hear in your presence. You thunder so in the space inside my left ear that I cannot forget you, even for the length of a line, the weight of a tear. So as you can hear, there's a conversation between Hebrew and English in that poem, and I get asked this question a lot. I'm going to read a few poems that I've never read in public, but I've never read before. They're from what I hope will be a new collection called How to Live as a Man in a Time of Beasts. And they are in the voice of Avraham ibn Ezra, who lived at another very, very challenging time in Jewish history. So Julie, let's see, can we switch? Let's see how we do. Okay, so as some of you may know, Avraham ibn Ezra left his native Spain in the year 1140, and he traveled alone for the next 28 years. And so the first poem is imagining his experience on the road. Notes while hungry on the road. The whole world lives inside one life. The whole world in all its grime and grandeur and quiet. The mind is housed in the hungry body. Fed and welcomed, it survives. Starved, it casts itself out. And the next poem, The Tree of Knowledge, I very much identify with what Joan just read for us. I think many of us have seen how alone we are in this world. And this poem is inspired by the traditional belief that Avraham Ibn Ezra and his best friend Rabbi Yehuda Levi traveled together to Kairouan in Tunisia, and they visited what some then believed was the Tree of Knowledge. So it's based on this poem. As you may know, Avraham Ibn Ezra's only son converted to Islam, and my interest was always imagining how that happened and what his reaction was to that. So here is The Tree of Knowledge. It's a very short poem. The Tree of Knowledge. If someone wants to leave you, they will leave you. They don't need a religion, a crusade, a war, even a door. Okay, there should be some next ones. Yeah, and this is another poem imagining Rabbi Yehuda Levi. The important minutes. Yehuda sailed alone to the land he long dreamed of, a land of sand and swamps, insects and waiting beasts, the so-called land of God. In swarthy high seas, he was alone as the moment before he was born, alone as all great poets are alone, in the important minutes, the soul-ticking ones which say, this is life itself. God, man, this itself is life. And the last two poems that I'm going to read, many historians believe that Avraham Ibn Ezra was murdered. He was murdered by an anarchist mob about 2 hours outside of London. And so you'll see the poem Murderers, and then the last poem is, you'll see in a moment. Okay, so Murderers memorializes the fact that he was murdered, and I think it made me think of the situation that we're in now. Murderers, mobs in the countryside, the widows of the road warn. Someone may want you dead, a man with a sword says plainly, as if anyone still cares where I am, where I bed, who I have loved. Perhaps I have lived too long. And the last poem I'm going to read is Imagining Ibn Ezra as he's dying. What you might need to know is Ibn Ezra's son Yitzchak was also known later in life as Abu Sa'id. Okay, so that's the fifth line. And this is Ibn Ezra writing his own elegy. Elegy. Let the scholars guess, let the poets breathe, let readers reread. Avraham, Abraham, Ibrahim, Yitzchak, Isaac, Abu Sa'id. Of course, there is life on the page. I tell you, my body, I write it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to introduce our last reader, Sherri Mandell. Sherri won a National Jewish Book Award for her memoir, The Blessing of a Broken Heart, and her latest book is The Kabbalah of Writing, Mystical Practices for Inspiration and Creativity. So let me spotlight you, Sherri. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. Evening and good afternoon. Mine is an essay that was published in the Times of Israel, and it's more practical advice. I'm a writer, but I'm also a pastoral counselor. I hope you'll find this useful. A nation in trauma, guard your strength. We are living in traumatic times, and we are in trauma, experiencing great pain and national mourning. But people have a lot of misconceptions about trauma. I want to share some of the things I've learned about trauma as a bereaved mother and as a pastoral counselor. My son Kobe was murdered by terrorists with his friend Yosef Ishran in 2001, when the boys were 13 and 14 years old. In 2002, we created the Kobe Mandel Foundation which runs Camp Kobe and other support programs for bereaved families. We have worked with hundreds of families whose loved ones were murdered by terrorists. 1, most people will not suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. PTSD includes flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, and the inability to function in ordinary life. While it is normal now to have nightmares and disrupted sleep and difficulty focusing, that behavior has to continue for a long time in order to be diagnosed as PTSD, i.e., until after the war is over. Right now, most of us are not functioning well because we are under attack, and the murders and kidnapping that have occurred are nightmares. But if you are still functioning, and if you have not witnessed the trauma firsthand, you probably will not get PTSD. One summer, we tested for PTSD at Camp Kobe. Only 1% of the children whose family members had been murdered by terrorists suffered from PTSD. That doesn't mean they don't suffer, but suffering from trauma and traumatic bereavement is not the same as suffering from PTSD. On the other hand, bystander trauma and post-trauma stress disorder do exist. You can experience PTSD by watching the horror on your screen. People keep sending me videos, and I try not to watch them because viewing violent images is not healthy for the soul. It's not healthy for children. It's not healthy for adults. Yes, care about what happened, but don't plunge yourself into the horror of the experience. You can feel and help without being traumatized. Be careful to limit your viewing of the atrocities. 2, post-traumatic growth can also be a result of trauma. Post-traumatic growth means finding a new enhanced meaning in life. You can see this happening all around us in Israel. The goodness, the chesed that is sweeping this country is enormous. People are pitching in to help in any way they can. This phenomenon of goodness is post-traumatic growth on a nationwide scale. 3, to deal with feeling out of control and overwhelmed, it's a good idea as much as possible to root yourself in routine, what you normally do, taking care of children, working, eating healthily, sleeping, not spending hours watching atrocities. My friend asked her son, who is in the army, what she could do to help him. He said, do things that make you happy. These acts of ordinary life can become an affirmation of the power of life. So give, bake challah for soldiers, help the soldiers, help return the captives, help make your community safer and stronger. Pray. 4, the enemy wants to shatter us, wants us to be in shambles and to feel disconnected and disempowered and terrified. So one of the most important things we can do right now is connect with others. Be in touch with others. Reach out to those you think may be struggling. Call your friends and family. A real call, not just a WhatsApp. Accept your fear, but don't dwell in it. Try to do positive things that will keep you from drowning in the anxiety. 5, you don't have to be strong. After my son was murdered, a lot of people said, be strong. I thought that was crazy. Why would I be strong? I was suffering and crying. But one young man said to me, guard your strength. I love that. Yes, figure out what your strengths are and make sure that you use them and protect them. For example, I'm a writer, so I make sure to have time in my day devoted to writing. And I'm writing about the war and resilience. So guard your energy. If you need to rest, go ahead. Again, protect yourself and your children from the horrors on the screen. Keep yourself as whole as you can. 6, the words for sadness and design in Hebrew are similar, etzev. Sadness must be given shape. Make sure to create, to dance, to yell, to write, to draw, to transform your sadness into some shape that can hold it. 7, in every suffering, there is a summons. What are you being called on to do now? What is the collective summons for our nation? Work for unity, work to rebuild, work for victory against our enemies. 8, don't assume what someone else is feeling. I've had almost a dozen people who mean well say to me, this must be extremely triggering for you. Let me decide how I feel. Ask me how I'm feeling. Ask what it's like to lose a son to terror and then be faced with a war and so much grief and atrocity. But don't trigger me by assuming that I'm triggered. We're all different. We all have different coping styles, but assume that you will be okay because most of us will be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Really, really helpful. I know I've been forwarding your essays to a lot of people because they were very, very helpful to me. Okay. There's one last section of the program that I want to put up on the screen before we open it up. But before that, I just want to take another little poll, which I did last time, which is if you're interested in attending another one of these solidarity events, please indicate yes, no, not sure. Any answer is valid. I'll leave it up for a minute or so. And I want to thank everyone for being here while you're here. We have a lot of people on the line today. Okay. Yes, it still seems like another overwhelming yeses. Okay. Thank you, everyone who voted. Okay. So let's see the results. Okay. Okay. Now we're gonna read a couple of prayers for me. This is helpful. If you're not the praying type, feel free to turn down your volume and write whatever you want to write. But I'm gonna start with Mishaberach Latzal, which we say in our shul every Shabbat. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, ויברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל בעומדים על משמר ארצנו וערי אלוהינו מגבול הלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים, מן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה ביבשה באוויר ובים. ייתן אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו ניגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם ויתרם בכתר ישועה ובעטרת ניצחון, וקוים בהם הכתוב, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם להושיע אתכם, ונאמר אמן. Now I want to call on Alana Blumberg to read the next one. Alana. There you go. Hold on. Find you, Alana. Oh, there you are. Okay.
מי שברך אבותינו אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, יוסף, משה ואהרון, דוד ושלמה, הוא יברך וישמור וינצור את השבויים. בתוך שאר אחינו בית ישראל הנתונים בצרה ובשביה, בעבור שהקהל מתפלל בעבורם, הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם ויוציאם מחושך וצל מוות, ומוסרותיהם ינתק וממצוקותיהם יושיעם, וישיבם מהרה לחיק משפחותיהם. הודו לאדוני חסדו ונפלאותיו לבני אדם, ויפוים בהם נקרא שכתוב, ופדויי אדוני ישובון, ובאו ציון ברינה, בשמחת עולם על ראשם. ששון ושמחה ישיגו, ונסו יגון וענפה. Amen.
Okay. And the last one, I'm sorry, I don't have the transliteration here. אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו, ברך את מדינת ישראל, ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו. הגן עליה בעברת חסדך, פרוס עליה סוכת שלומך, ושלח אורך ועמיתך לראשיה, שריה ויועציה, ותקנם בעצה טובה מלפניך. חזק את ידי מגיני ארץ קודשנו, והנחילם אלוהינו ישועה, ויתרת ניצחון תעטרם, ונתת שלום בארץ, ושמחת עולם ליושביה. ואת אחינו כל בית ישראל, פקודנה בכל ארצות פזוריהם, ותוליכם מהרה, קוממיות לציון עירך, ובירושלים משכן שמך, ככתוב בתורת משה עבדך, אם יהיה נדחך בקצה השמיים, משם יקבצך אדוני אלוהיך, ומשם ייקחך, והביאך אדוני אלוהיך אל הארץ אשר ירשו אבותיך, וירשת והביתך, וירבך מאבותיך. ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראת שמך, ולשמור את כל דברי תורתך, ושלח לנו מהרה בן דוד משיח צדקך, לפדות ממך כקץ ישועתך. הופע בהדר וגאון עוזך על כל יושבי תבל ארצך, ואמר כל אשר נשמה באפו, אדוני אלוהי ישראל מלך ומלכותו בכל משלה, אמן סלה. Okay, one last thing before I open it up. I'm going to send out these different links of suggestions of how to help. We have a link for the all the communities of the South we're trying to rebuild. The Kobe Mandel Foundation, which helps bereaved mothers, fathers, widows, orphans, and siblings who have lost loved ones to terror and other tragedies. Iran, the mental health hotline, Haim's wife volunteers, life-saving emotional first aid services. The Nayot Project in memory of Haim's son Nayot, helping kids with learning difficulties aren't in school or are in school. I hope they're back in school by now, actually. Yachad Omarim, which is Vivian's minyan here in Modiin, that's been supporting single-parent families on an ongoing basis and now providing support to victims of the attack, such as the evacuees from Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and Partners of Fallen IDF Soldiers, which provides psychological and emotional support to the unmarried partners of fallen IDF soldiers in order to assist them as they rebuild their lives. I think I saw on their website just now that they have helped something like 138 partners of fallen IDF soldiers since the start of the war. And then I will also send out some additional resources, including Erica Dreyfus's curated list of articles and resources, an open letter that you're all invited to sign on anti-Semitism, Israel, and the literary community. How to subscribe to Vivian's Substack, Sherri's article, Haim's stories, and how to subscribe to his Substack, and Aviya's article, which I just found when I was looking for which Mishberach Shvuim to put up. That came out on the forward, and the Jewish Book Council's ongoing series for Israeli writers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And anyone who wants to say something can, I'll undo the spotlights. Anyone, just raise your hand or put it in the chat. Now we're all here together. I know we've gone out. It's already 9 o'clock or whatever time it is for you. Okay, does anyone want to say anything? Raise your hand or do the little, let me scroll, see if I see any hands raised. Okay, Yoni, thank you for this question. Yoni Hammer Pasoy, who just appeared at our Literary Modiin August, right before all this started. This question is for any and all of tonight's readers. I'm wondering what your thoughts and feelings are about the anti-Israel climate in the arts world, and where this might lead those of us looking for, if not outright support, then at least a more nuanced take on things. Anyone? I'll ask all of the readers tonight to unmute. Joan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't know if you were following the National Book Awards in the United States, Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. And I did not tune in, but I read some reports from people. I'm on a Jewish writers Facebook group who said, well, it wasn't so bad. It was, someone asked, I think I didn't read the whole question, but it said, can there be a more nuanced view? I think it's it's of a piece of all of the problems we have with communication. People seem to just want to do kind of black and white sound bites. So it makes it a little difficult for this to be nuanced. And so when you say, is there any other way for support? I know many of us, like in the States, who are in the sort of writing world or whatever, are just forming these groups and have found them to be really helpful. Even though we're not actively able to change those other things, just having other people to communicate with and share the perceptions has been helpful. So that's as far as I could offer. I mean, people are aware of the problems. The problem is, in some ways, to be honest, it's always been there, at least my perception. It's been there a long time. So now it's just sort of bubbled up and it's obvious in the surface. So if you can get support from others and they help validate your perceptions, and then people are actually actively helping each other, finding venues for people to place their work and that kind of thing, or just validate your perceptions. That's a big help. I hope that helps your answer, whoever asked the question.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Joan said, because it is true. Even my book was The Blessing of a Broken Heart, was published 22 years ago. And my agent at the time told me that because I was living in Israel, it would be very hard to get one of the big publishers. Nobody wanted to hear Israel's story. And what I would say from Israel, I was talking with my husband about this right before this workshop. I think we just have to be tough and stand up and keep speaking out and just not accept the status quo of anti-Semitism. And we, in Israel, we're fighting. But I think that in America, you have to fight as well, to stand up and just, I think maybe just to be brave about it and to have courage, and to maybe we can find alternative, ways of getting our messages out.
Aviya, go ahead.
I think this is a huge problem, and I agree with Joan and Sherri that it's been around for a long time. I think two things are super powering it now. Number one is younger people are surrounded by people their age who are very anti-Israel. So the younger things go, the harder it's going to be for Jewish writers. And I think the other element is the power of social media. So social media can make you think that everyone agrees with you very, very quickly. You get thousands of people approving any thought. So those are the two things. Recently, I spoke at, I recommend, it was the Jewish Book Council's Jewish Writers Conference, and we had a session on anti-Semitism in the literary world. So if you're interested, I recommend seeking that out. I thought the other panelists had a lot of useful things to say. But I would say that just keep in mind that there are definitely strident anti-Israel, anti-Semitic voices in the literary world, for sure. And then there are people who support Israel, support Jewish culture, and then there are a lot of people who are silent. So remember that there are a lot of people who are silent who you don't hear from, and you really don't know where they stand. So I don't know if I would jump to conclusions and say everyone is against this sort of thing. I recently went through a very unpleasant situation in a literary organization where I'm in a leadership role, and one of the things that I noticed was the role of silence. And not everyone is willing to put themselves out there and risk their career or their job or whatever, but they're not going to go against you either. So I think that's also important to keep in mind. In terms of what to do, I really agree with what Yonatan said earlier. I think there's a need for more connections between writers, Jewish writers who write in different languages and live in different countries. I think that should be strengthened. That's number one. And I also think that philanthropists and that class, the donor class, should look at Jewish culture and try and strengthen Jewish culture at this fraught moment. That's what I would say.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I wrote an article in Hebrew this week that hopefully I'll do an English version at some point. But basically I brought a historical precedent and about the importance of engaging. I think there are a lot of young Jews out there, including some in my own family, who just don't know a whole lot. And I think their values they're out demonstrating I'm not talking about people who support Hamas. I'm talking about young people with humanistic values who are shocked by what they're seeing in Gaza and who are out demonstrating for a ceasefire or, against Israeli aggression. I think it's very important to engage those people and to acknowledge that their motives are correct. Their motives are pure, but they just don't understand the context. And this happened back in after the 6-Day War, when the New Left turned against Israel. And there was actually an Israeli program to address that by addressing young Jewish New Left activists in their own language and in their own terms. So I think it's important to be patient and engage in dialogue. And I think we're probably all doing a lot of that instead of making money right now these days.
I would add that one of the things I subscribed to, it was bothering me because she puts out a list of very interesting links, and in the first week of the war, it was fairly balanced. Or I have to go back and look at what she did, but already by last week, I was like, okay, there's no Israeli voices here, and I think some people like that also need to hear some of the positive stories coming out. All those videos I've been seeing about the Hamal and Rahat, the Bedouin town in the Negev, where they're working together. All different kinds of people are working together. Any kind of essays or stories or poems that show that there is a lot of coexistence on the day-to-day basis between Jews and Arabs. So I'm going to try to push that a bit more. One other resource that I forgot to mention, and I'll send it out, is that I just learned of a new discussion forum today by literary agent Anna Olswinger. You might be here on this call, Anna. I see an Anna on here. I'm not sure if that's you. It's like a discussion group for writers who are in support of Israel. I'll send that out as well to everyone. Okay. Anyone else have questions, comments? I know we.
Julie, I just wanted. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just want to follow up on what Aviya said afterwards, which is, at the same time that we might be aware that, this is there's a lot of negative feeling, there is a lot of also silence that's essentially positive. And this is not a pitch for my upcoming book, but I just want to say this is a story collection. The first story starts with, he was born in Baghdad in 1962 and came to Israel or something like that. And this collection is being published by not a Jewish press, and it received a prize from a Chinese American writer who was the judge, and all the people who were at the press, nobody has said a peep about it. I had assumed this book would never see the light of day because of its intensely Israeli Jewish content. And so I think I only say that by way of saying, don't assume it's all negative and that nobody is interested in your voice, because it turns out actually lots of people are interested in your voice who are not necessarily they're not necessarily the ones you think who would be the ones. You don't have to just confine yourself to a silo or anything like that, and we want to keep our hearts open that way as well. So that's all I would say.
Jess, did you have your hand up or were you clapping? What? Okay. I can't, you're muted. But if you'd like to unmute, you can unmute and ask a question. Or put it in the chat if you can. Okay. Try to
Can
put
I
it in the chat, Jess. Go ahead, Aviya.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I'm a relatively new Substack user, but I have found that that is a way to connect with other voices. So I started a Substack newsletter after my youngest brother insisted that I write one, and it's been a really wonderful experience. So I would say that that's another way to connect with I would say Jewish voices or alternative voices to what maybe a mainstream publication like LitHub is pushing. So I would say that some searching on Substack might work for you and might help you find additional forms of community.
Hi, Julie. Sorry about that. I couldn't unmute for some
Okay.
reason.
Go ahead.
A question and then a comment. Will you let us know how we can read Sherri's essays?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Tomorrow I send out a recording for anybody who registered, for anybody who registered. So even if you were here for the whole time, you'll get the copy of the recording as well as a list of links that I shared on the screen before. And also, because in the interest of time, I didn't want to read everybody's full bio, so I'll send out their full bios so you know who all the writers
Thank
are.
you. And then I had a comment for Joan Leegant. Joan, I worked with you in 1979 at the Israeli Environmental Protection Service in Jerusalem. I saw your name. I said, that's got to be the same Joan Leegant that I worked with.
Oh my goodness.
Jessica Sandler. You probably don't remember me, but I'm Julie's neighbor now.
Oh, well, let's email and try to reconnect and revive my memory of that. How nice of you to say so. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone have anything else they want to add? Comments, anything? I think yeah, I was trying to get everyone, I was trying to allow Jess to unmute, so I changed the settings so that I gave everybody permission to unmute, but it's not, you don't need to unmute if you don't have anything to say. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I want to give a special thanks to Joanna and Vivian and Sherri and Joan and Haim and Aviya and Sherri and Yonatan, who had to leave early, and to Alana for reading the Mishaberach. And again, thank you to Joanna, whose original idea this was right in the first week or two of the war. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Last thing is that I am happy to say that on December 3rd, we are going to get back to our regularly scheduled Literary Modiin event with Daniel Victor, Tara Eisen, and Linda Cass. So I'll send out how you can, that was supposed to happen on October 15th, but we postponed it, obviously. And then we have even 2 events in January. So maybe I'll schedule another solidarity event sometime towards the end of December. I don't know. But that's it for now. Thank you, everyone, and Bisarot Tovot. May we hear good news soon. May the hostages all return immediately now. Thank you all.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.